Welcome to the Connectivity Cloud Podcast, the podcast that provides expert insights into the cloud and IT landscape. I'm Mark Dembo, and each month we'll explore key topics like scaling secure infrastructure, tackling emerging risks, and staying ahead of the latest trends. Whether you're managing multi-vendor environments or navigating cloud modernization, this is the show for you, delivering practical advice for today's decision makers. Welcome to the Connectivity Cloud Podcast, your trusted source for insights into the latest trends, strategies, and technologies shaping cloud security and infrastructure. I'm your host, Mark Dembo. Today, we are joined by Pedro Gonçalves, Chief Information Security Officer at EQT Group, and Michael Tremante, Senior Director of Product at Cloudflare. Pedro leads cybersecurity and platform engineering strategy at EQT Group, focusing on digital transformation, building long-term resilience, and risk management. Pedro also supports deal sourcing and value creation across EQT's global portfolio of companies. He brings over 15 years of experience in cybersecurity and has contributed to high-profile IPOs, M&A assessment, and incident response. Michael oversees Cloudflare's application security products, including WAF, DDoS mitigation, and threat intelligence. He focuses on developing solutions that help businesses stay secure while scaling their operations. Michael has over a decade of experience in security, starting out as a security researcher and penetration tester before moving on to join Cloudflare. Software engineer by trade, still enjoys coding and runs several online projects. Pedro, Michael, thanks for being here today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Amazing. In today's episode, we'll explore security trends for 2025, including how AI-powered threats and deepfake technology are reshaping the security landscape. We'll discuss the delicate balance between security and seamless user experience in the cloud era and share essential strategies for risk anticipation and mitigation. Whether you're a CISO, CTO, or security leader, this episode is packed with actionable insights to help you navigate today's complex security challenges. Great to have you both here. Let's start. I would like to kick it off with what I call get to know you questions. Michael, you have tons of experience in this industry. I'm wondering, what's the most bizarre or unexpected security threat you've ever come across?
Good question, Mark. Thinking through it, I think two come to mind pretty quickly. So you mentioned this. I started my career as a penetration tester, and it was very daunting the first time I was given sort of the task of try to perform some hacking against an entity that, of course, had given us legal permission to do it for the purpose of security, and the big worry dawns on you that you will not find anything, right? And that the report you're going to write up, and this was a big financial institution, it was going to be pretty much empty to some extent. This was of course, I'm not going to mention who it was, but it was a pretty simple marketing site. Which made it even harder to some extent because most content was completely static, right? Normally, from a penetration testing perspective, the more dynamic the application, the more things you can poke. The only thing that was available on the site, which seemed dynamic, was a very simple sign-up newsletter form. And I'm not sure how familiar everyone on the call is with sort of basic penetration testing tooling, but there's a little tool called SQL Map. That you point towards a form and you let it do its thing, and in theory it tries all sorts of different prompts and it tries to see if there's an SQL injection attack, right? Which for me, in my first penetration testing, was like the default thing to try immediately. It turns out that I lucked out, and although this was a very simple, literally static marketing site, the email newsletter was connecting to some backend system. But the way the system was connecting was connecting to a database table, which had literally in plain text, username, password, and backend system. And just from that simple marketing site, there was, let's say, a little bit too much information in there, to the point that my manager back then told me immediately, stop here, don't go further. This will be escalated immediately to whoever commissioned the test and to probably their manager as well. So that was one. That was I felt very proud. It was really simple actually, but that penetration testing was definitely worth the money for who commissioned it.
100%. I think they really got a bargain right there.
immediately like that. And it only, I remember within the first 6 hours, this came up, right? So it was like an instant. We didn't even wait to write the report. We immediately notified them. The other thing, though, maybe a lot more recent, was, and it was a bit of a more odd one. It wasn't me, actually. It was something that we discovered as part of our job at Cloudflare. As you know, we protect a lot of political websites and, try to support as much as an open political campaign for everyone to make sure all the sites are up and online. And I remember there was a bug that affected one site, which again was very static, but allowed an attacker via the URL to essentially embed an emoticon on the site of the target. And you can imagine what sort of URLs the attacker was creating and sharing across, making viral on all the social media attacks. I thought that was a really interesting side effect of fun marketing ideas that can turn bad pretty quickly.
Yes. Oh, yes. Super interesting. Pedro, what's one cybersecurity myth that drives you crazy every time you hear it? I guess there are tons out there. Is there anyone where that comes to mind immediately?
Yeah, definitely. I would say that the VPN protects your privacy. It's one of them, and it's still quite used on marketing material. I think people need to understand that definitely VPN can hide your IP address. But remember that the VPN provider will have your data, your logs, and can provide that information to actually authorities. And at the same time, and I'll remember, if you're connecting to a website, when you're interacting with that website, the cookies, the browser tracking, and other kind of activities can understand who you are. So I think we need to be mindful what actually VPN is and isn't, right? So in a nutshell, yes, can camouflage your your IP address from your ISP, but it will not protect you completely from privacy from the provider itself, but as well from the services that you are connecting with. That's the main one, but I'm going to give a second one as well, since Michael here to give two examples. I'll give one more, a very, very small one, which is, that people feel that it can be, let's say, hacked through the public Wi-Fi connections. I mean, of course, everything can be hacked. I mean, we know this, and anything that's connected to the internet everyone that works in tech knows that. But nowadays, how the Wi-Fi works on an airport or in a shopping mall, I mean, you need to see that it's micro-segmented. You are in isolated mode, so it's hard or extremely difficult for you to be hacked by being connected to those kind of Wi-Fi's. So yes, I think you can use it securely overall.
Yeah, that's super funny, because I still live in this world where I'm like thinking, oh, I'm at the airport. I need to use a VPN to stay private. So I think like I'm basically falling for both of those honey traps that you just mentioned. Let's shift gears a little bit, and we're talking about security trends in 2025. Let's start by looking a little bit back. Pedro, with your experience advising big organizations on digital transformation and security strategy, Michael, you are literally driving innovation and application security at Cloudflare. You both have basically front row seats to see how the security landscape has been evolving. Looking back at the last few years, what is perhaps the most significant shift you've seen in the security challenges that organizations are facing? Anyone wants to take a step of that?
I can start maybe, and then hand over to Pedro. Two things really come to mind. The first one, when we build application security products at Cloudflare, we always think about mitigating or locking down environments, right? I think that's something that any CISO or security practitioner is very worried about, is making sure that whatever they build or whatever the development teams are building cannot be hacked into, and there's no ways into the organization, maybe even via social engineering, like doing training and all that sort of stuff. The one thing that's become apparent over the years, though, is more and more so nowadays, especially with companies moving to the cloud, trying to make distributed work as efficient as possible, is that you don't actually even know what to look at or where to start your search of locking down your environment and making sure that everything is secure, right? So over the past couple of years, the concept of discovery is a term that has come up more and more often than it used to historically. And I'm finding, companies and customers finding value just by providing visibility. And the mitigation portion is actually even a second factor to that. And then this is actually a really good segue. And then maybe I'll hand over to Pedro. Is of course, AI is the big thing now. But even more than, the actual use case of the AI or how, you can use it to make your business more efficient. I was participating in the CISO roundtable not too long ago. And one of the CISOs was like, I don't even know, this was a large global enterprise. I don't even know which development teams in my business are potentially building endpoints that are serving LLM content, right? So just knowing that gives me something to start from. And right now I feel completely obscure, in the dark, which goes back again to that discovery portion becoming a really big thing that I'm seeing talked about now. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's going to stay with us for quite a few years.
I can complement that, Michael. I agree. I think, starting, from what you said in the beginning, I mean, what happened in these last years was a shift from, the classical perimeter. I mean, we call it the onion ring structure, where you have the internal network, internal production network, and then you have the office network, and you create those rings to protect and fence off attackers. That was actually proven across the years that, once the attacker was inside one of those perimeters, it became much more easier for him to, lateral shift and move to other internal networks. And then there was actually this change as well based and due to the cloud, and SaaS solutions to the identity, right? So we went from having a very strong perimeter to have basically a couple of things: services and endpoints, right? And then we have the user that is, between these two things, right? So the perimeter become much more abstract, and then we need to go more around behavior and identity. And secure the transactions between services and endpoints, macro segmentation and isolation, then trying to put everything inside the same, let's say, basket, the same network, and try to close the network, right? That was a huge shift, which then connects to a bit what Michael's saying at the end with the non-human identities. What's that? It's service accounts, API integrations, tokens, because that's how then these isolated microservices communicate between each other. Right. And then that becomes kind of what the CISO, the modern CISO needs to worry about. How can I make sure that I have this environment with 100 applications communicating between each other across the internet through APIs and integrations? And how can I make sure that those integrations are done in a way that nobody is using that to data extract information or getting access to those services? So I think that's the major shift that I've seen this last 5-6 years.
Those are major shifts, right? It's a big ask for organizations to change that way. If we look ahead, and I think Michael already mentioned that, right? The big hot topic has been AI. I think it's pretty tough to talk about security trends in 2025 and not talk about AI. Pedro, you mentioned basically saying, hey, we don't have that parameter. We need to also focus on like the individual user being more secure, making sure they have the right access pattern. One of the big fears that I see when I read online news articles, or one article that came across is like this crazy story, how a finance worker paid out like 25 million after a supposed video call with the Deepfake CFO, right? So classic social engineering basically, but just on a completely different level that the industry has not seen before. What can organizations do, or how do you help organizations to stay ahead of these like AI-driven threats?
Yeah. So I feel like, and this is like I had this kind of discussion as well with my chief risk officer. We feel like the more AI mimics a human, the more operational controls you need to have inside the organization. So we say we are kind of going back to the 90s, where majority of the processes had more operational controls than security controls. What I mean by this is you cannot allow one employee to do a transaction of millions of dollars. 4 eyes principle, vendor callbacks, all those classical control needs to be in place. Yes, for sure, we need to invest and on training our people to detecting those kind of scams. Yes, we need to invest on security automated controls that can detect somehow that this is a deep fake. But if that fails, and it will fail a couple of times because it's only going to be based in heuristics and things like that, it will be a non-deterministic control, then it's the operational controls on your organization that needs to be in place. So making sure that things that are high risk, that have a high financial impact or high reputational impact, have a set of steps and controls that you need multiple people on that chain to execute that action or transaction. And I think if you have a mix of both, I think that's kind of like currently the best way that you can approach these new threats.
That makes sense. Okay, but basically you're not saying, okay, let's use or only rely on new technology to fight new technology. Actually, let's have the right controls in place and processes, just elevating the problem, so to say, to different layer. Makes a ton of sense. Michael, my guess is that AI, or I'm pretty sure actually, that AI can not only be used for increasing the threat severity and landscape, but also can be used for good, so to say. And machine learning can be used as threat intelligence to detect and mitigate attacks. Can you talk a little bit about how you and your team are thinking about that and how you might already be using AI ML?
Yeah, AI is a very broad topic, right? And definitely there's really good use cases for it and not so good use cases for it. Turns out that security in some of its facets is actually a very good application for AI related technologies. At Cloudflare, actually going back in time, we've been using more traditional ML machine learning based systems for quite some time, even putting aside the modern LLM endpoints that I'll touch on in a moment. To give you one big example that has been very successful for us is to detect novel attack patterns and trends before, in the context of web applications, before we were aware of them, and in a much quicker way compared to a human security researcher. So, but of course, to make a machine learning system be able to detect novel patterns with a low false positive rate, which is something that every security practitioner need to worry about, especially on the mitigation side, is make sure there's not many false positives. You need a really good training set and really good training data, and we're advantaged by that. Mark, you know this. We've been running our web application firewall across the internet, across many millions of applications on the internet for many years at this time. And a side effect of that is we have access to pretty much at this point unlimited true positive data of what web application attacks look like, right? So as technology evolved, it made sense to then train a model against all of our true positive data, redeploy that same model on the same network where the WAF is running. And then what you find is that although the signatures that we have that are built by humans to detect web attacks are really good because they ensure really low false positives, the model is able to identify maybe slight variations that will not match a signature, but are clearly malicious, right? And if you look at, every year there's thousands of new CVs that get published against open source software, all sorts of vulnerabilities. At this point, most of them are just variations of our existing attacks, right? So maybe the endpoint is different, maybe the way the input is formatted is slightly different. It's rare that there's something completely novel in a new syntax or a new language. And we've seen the machine learning classifier be very effective at detecting these novel attacks. That's more than a more traditional AI sort of topic. With LLMs, though, of course, not only Cloudflare, right? If you look at the market, a lot of the SIEM vendors, a lot of these security posture management companies are now coming up with their CISO co-pilots. Some companies will call them, right? Where you have an AI agent in the dashboard and you can ask the question, check my logs for the last 24 hours. Have you spotted something that's anomalous?
Interrupting you briefly here. Pedro, have you already tried any of these?
Yeah, we tried. I mean, we also internally we have Motherbrain. It's a very known. In the NLP world, we are very known to starting working with AI since I say early 2016. By the way, we had a little LLM at that time, a very small, very clunky LLM, okay, compared with what it is now, OpenAI, naturally. But we were playing with it for a long time. But I think my takeaway, and yes, we used it a bit like for summarizing and to spot checking, like you said, Michael. But I think the big takeaway, and this is more, I'm generalizing it, not just for security, but for the CIOs out there that are listening, as that, if you apply AI in a right way to enhance your processes, that's the way to think, right? I think Michael's very good. This is like, so we're already doing this, but now we're giving that extra nudge that LM can help us to, skim through this in a much faster and easy way, right? And if you apply that kind of sentiment to the things in your organization, that's the way to think how AI should be applied, and not let's say the hyperscale movement in the beginning where I just put a model here, I feed him with whatever, and he magically is going to figure out what's going on, right? I think that's kind of like, I think nowadays, I think people are starting to understand that's a bit of still a myth. We hope that, I don't know, who knows, in next year what's going to happen, right? This thing is being involved like crazy in these last years. But I think what you said, Michael, I think is very good. It's that kind of mindset, enhancing small things here and here. Here's like a Lego castle. And then when you look back and say, oh, that is amazing, right? We took 10 hours to do this. Now we take 1 hour or even less because you optimize and enhance the process, and we apply the AI in the right sweet spots to create that movement.
Yeah, Pedro, I think you're spot on. And that's something that we're actively exploring, right? But I saw some products that are really cool where, if you're an open source intelligence researcher, for example, and you're scanning the web, everyone's publishing indicators of compromise in different formats, in different ways, right? And this is where an LLM, which is trained for the specific use case, to Pedro's point, small enhancement, really saves a whole lot of time, right? Because he can say, this research report was published. It could be a PDF, it could be a web page, it could be in very many different formats. Go run all the queries against our SIEM installation or whatever system we have. Cloudflare, search the Cloudflare logs against those indicators of compromise. And in one go, you're saving yourself, several hours of work because the LLM is going to do it for you.
Yeah. And just to close here, Mark, it's important to say, like, I think in the cyber world, we're using AI for a long time, and machine learning has been the key thing. I mean, for pattern analysis is still I'll say, the best tool in the box, right? And then, Gen AI, it's the reasoning piece that we put it a bit on top. But I would say, if you need to choose one right now from a cyber perspective, I think ML is still the winning piece here, because you're doing a lot of heavy lift under the hood, especially in EDRs, to really detect patterns, right? And Gen AI is still now growing, and we'll see how it will progress in the next years. Yeah,
absolutely. Super interesting. I'm generally also a huge fan of the Copilot branding, because it's literally what it is. The AI is not in the driver's seat in the Gen AI space. It's my assistant. It makes my life better, but it still takes the human oftentimes in the loop or as decision making to do those decisions. One of the things that is super interesting for me is when I read blogs, and I read a lot of technical blogs. And Michael, you are also a publisher of a lot of these blogs. I read the Cloudflare blog quite a bit, right? And when I see you and your team talking about product announcements, oftentimes they're motivated from regulations somewhere in the world changing, and you're thinking, how can we help people and organizations be compliant with them? Which big regulatory changes should a CISO or a CIO be aware of in 2025? And do you have any easy and actionable steps that they can take to be compliant with them?
Yeah, actually, this reminds me, talking about trends at the start of the session, changing regulatory environment is definitely a trend that's coming up more and more. I'll mention one tactical one, but then I'll go a little bit broader. The tactical example, of course, that we come across, at least in the context of web application security, is the updates to the payment card industry compliance standard. So actually, at the end of March, the new version 4.0 will be the official version. What this means to CISOs, it depends, right, on what type of business you're in. But if you're handling in any way whatsoever payment card details online, you will need to comply to this new standard. And then actually there's been a clarification recently that I believe I'm still trying to understand it, but I believe that even if you're using a payment provider to offload the payment system, you may still actually be required to abide to some of the PCI standard. Now, from the PCI compliance, like, is a huge document. There's hundreds and hundreds of requirements in there. One of the novel bits, though, that I can touch on is the client-side security. In the context of application security, especially for web assets, the focus tends to be protecting the application itself. But over the past couple of years, everyone's building SaaS companies. Cloudflare itself is a SaaS company, and SaaS companies provide easy solutions to build more complex systems. And what happens, of course, is that, especially in the context of the web, developers will integrate SaaS systems in the application, right? So you cannot go to a website and there's going to be a chat system provided by Zendesk. There will be payment system provided by Stripe, you name it. Right, we're basically integrating systems more and more. What's happening, though, is that these SaaS businesses become prime targets, because if you get into a SaaS business, by consequence, you get access to the network of all the integrations they have, right? And this is the broader context of supply chain in the context of web attacks. And in payment pages, very often there's 3 or 4 tens of integrations from third parties. And the payment card industry has noted that this is actually a weak point. So it's not only you that need to be safe, it's even those third-party vendors need to be safe. And some of the controls put in place are around ensuring that, do you actually need that integration? Are you keeping an eye on it? Is that third-party vendor that has access to the payment page potentially changes their code in a malicious way, right? So that's something just to think about. But then I'll touch on the broader topic for a moment. So that's PCI. The broader, though, landscape here is that, from a PII and data residency perspective, there's a lot of regulations coming into play across many industries, putting some sort of like boundaries around where you can store, process data, right? This is becoming more complex. The European Union is coming up with their own regulations. One example is DORA in the UK, for example, from financial perspective. We're seeing the same in the US, the same in APAC. And these digital boundaries are, in my perspective, are going to be more and more frequent. And this is actually going to be a harder problem for companies to operate, right? We're even seeing the big players like the Googles, the Facebooks, the Microsofts starting to handle some of this and how they manage data around the globe. I don't think there's a clear solution on how to make that easy for the average business yet, though.
Go ahead. I wanted to say, you're on the other side of this. So which of these keep you up at night, so to say, right? I mean, like, it seems like there are a lot of challenges for you and EQT, right? You have like portfolio companies.
Yeah, well, I actually sleep good at night, because this is something like, as a CISO, you need to turn off a bit, if not, you'll not be fresh for the next day, but with all the concerns. But I will give you, because you asked in the beginning as well, like the recipe, so it'll connect to that, right? So this is what we do, right? We are a global organization. We are across different countries, like many other organizations, right? So the first thing that you should do is have a regulatory watch model. What actually that means is you set up a process where, and typically you have the help of lawyers and things like that, that allows you to tell you on the regulated entities where you operate, which actually regulations applies to you. It's extremely important that you carve out and scope exactly what it means to you. It's very simple for a compliance officer coming to you and say, well, you are compliant, that means all the company, and then it's like, and then the scope is huge. But if you actually do this job of having this regulatory watch model and then really understand, okay, this is the entities where I need to apply this regulation, meaning DORA or the EU A Act or the SEC cyber regulation. So all this kind of new regulations that are popping up in the last 6 months, you can then creep out the scope in terms of like the universe of applications that needs to be under that regulation. And I think that's extremely important, because that will drive less costs, less impact to engineers, less complexity on the audits. So that's kind of the first thing I'll do. The second thing, of course, I will do is to try to create a matrix that would touch all these regulations. So you're probably going to have the same control answering the same question made in different ways on a different regulation. So you need to map that out as well so that you create, let's say, your master framework that is able to accommodate the 3, 4, 5 regulations that you need to be compliant with, cross-cutting that with, of course, the entities I mentioned that needs to be under that regulation. And then if you do that, it takes a while, but not a lot. When you do that, you really go to a really nitty point where you know exactly, okay, these are the systems that in scope or processes in scope. These are the controls that I need to apply that will meet this regulation. Then you focus on that, and then there you can go to execution mode and then build those controls if you don't have them already, and make sure that they are, of course, effective and okay towards regulators and auditors. But I think what I want to say with all of this is like spend 80% of the time on the gap and scoping assessment, and then 20% on execution. I think in woodworking we say measure twice, cut once. It's kind of the same principle here for how we should tackle regulations.
I like this so much because, again, right, I started this podcast to saying, hey, we are here for actionable real-life insights, and this is exactly what just happened, right? So I think super valuable for everyone listening. Just first assess what do I actually really need to do to make sure that you're not overcomplicating the job. I guess in a multinational, multi-entity, multi-industry setup like you work, Pedro, I think that must be the bread and butter of your business, right? We talked a lot about the regulatory changes, and I also see that quite a bit, right, happening. And that is a big change out there. One thing that hasn't been changing and also will not change in 2025, I think, is sometimes the trade-off that security teams face, the trade-off between strong protection and seamless user experience, right? In theory, it might be the strongest protection to only have me log into that application from one location in the office, one machine only, one person in the room, log into 3 VPNs, multi-factor authentication. But most likely, I, as an employee, will try to find a shortcut to not do that process, right? And the same is true with like going to websites and the protection that you need there, where you say, hey, protection can get in the way of seamless user experience. Pedro, how do you advise companies to reduce that friction for end users while maintaining high security standards? What is your go-to advice there?
Yeah, I think this question is very important. I used to say that, you only can be a decent CISO if you are doing exactly that, if you're maintaining a balance between business and security. Because if I block everything, you don't need me. Anyone can just grab a framework and apply a bunch of controls. And the opposite is also true. If you don't do nothing, you also don't need, a CISO for that, right? So the extremes are both not viable and not aligned with the business needs. So it's really like the middle point there that is important. So I would say like nowadays with the current technology and how we use our environment. So we talked about like not having a perimeter and being more services and endpoints. It's about behavior. So what we try to do is monitor behavior of users. So we have a seamless integration. Yes, we have multi-factor biometrics that makes it simple with, for example, Touch ID to, create that authentication towards the computer. So that's quite seamless. But then we don't try to go for the block approach, block private email, block Netflix, block, cloud storage or whatever. What we try to do is to monitor behaviors. And when we understand that the behavior as having is a negative behavior, so it's a malicious behavior, that's when we execute either by blocking that behavior or by reaching out directly to the user. Hey, why is this happening here, right? And I think if you apply that strategy, you can maintain a balance between having security controls under the hood, analyzing, inspecting, blocking things. Like ADR is a good example. Like for example, right, if you download something that is potentially malicious, it will block and quarantine it under the hood without even the user kind of almost understand what happened. And that should be the same thing for example, data exfiltration and insider threats. So if you apply like this, I would say that you're able to keep efficiency and the business running without blocking too much things. But at the same time, you are keeping those risks at bay by controlling, monitoring malicious behaviors and acting accordingly with it.
Yep. Super interesting. Michael, you and your team, you're basically building services that organizations use to protect themselves, right? How much does end user experience impact your product development? How do you and your teams strike a balance there?
Yeah. And I guess for us, there's two examples, but most of it is the security practitioners are the users in this case. And even from their perspective, we need to provide simple tools that work out of the box, right? This has actually guided all the philosophy of product development at Cloudflare. We pride ourselves to be the simplest to use to achieve, the best outcomes in the shortest time possible. And actually, there's quite a few innovative things we've been doing to try and achieve that. And I'll make two examples. First one is if you look at the traditional sort of hardware appliance that sits on the edge of your network, right? Once you hook it in, then you need to start deploying all the rules, all the signatures, right? To Pedro's point, there's this idea that historically you do block. Over the past couple of years, we've actually started rethinking what is the better way of doing that. And it actually goes back to the visibility point I said earlier. As soon as you're proxying traffic through the Cloudflare network, we highlight everything we see with all the relevant matches, but no blocking happens out of the box, right? And from our perspective, the end user, again, here is the security practitioner, probably someone in the CISO's team. They get to see all the things. They get all the visibility, they get the monitoring, and the end users of their applications are fine, right? The development team isn't starting to get blocks all over the place whilst they're developing their apps. And then to Pedro's point, once the malicious behavior has been identified, but requires additional suspicion, then there's the option to block in, right? But the return on investment is sort of way further up in that chain. Then I think the other point note, of course, in Pedro's perspective, the end user for Pedro, I assume is, the employees of the business. We have a couple of B2C solutions, right? We have, for example, in the context of web, everyone hates the CAPTCHAs. Some of them are honestly very hard to pass, and you don't know what you need to click on, and they feel like they're playing mind games with you. We have our own version of that, and a lot of research and development was done to making it as simple as possible. I'm not sure if all the listeners today have seen it, but ours is called Turnstile, and it's getting actually really wide adoption because all it is literally a checkbox. There's no clicking, what looks like a car, and you don't know if the thing is in the image is a car or not, or playing games and trying to line things up. It's just a checkbox. You can only do that with the data, though, right? So that's the counterpart. It's hard, but that was really designed with the idea of optimizing and reducing the friction to the user. Because if it becomes a friction, the user will go elsewhere. Mark, you said it. It will find another way to achieve the task.
Super interesting. We touched on so many points already, from AI, regulatory changes, shifts in the industry. I want to round it off, and I do this on every episode, with what I call quick-fire questions. We want to end it with actionable advice that a listener can take from this and be like, okay, those are things I need to focus on. So Michael, Pedro, I'm really looking forward to your best answers here. And I hope you're ready, because here we go. Imagine there are security leaders listening. What are the top 3 priorities they should focus on in 2025 to strengthen their security posture? Pedro, I'm curious to hear your answer from perhaps a leadership and organizational perspective.
Yeah, sure. So one of the untouched supply chain. Make sure that you have the good control over supply chain agreements and things like that. AI naturally is connected with the first one as well. So not just AI security per se or AI safety, but as well make sure that any new tool that you're using, that adding AI to that solution, that again, the agreements are correct, that they're not training your data, things like that. And then the component of the AI itself, that people are not using that information straight from AI machine without having a review of that, and then therefore potentially giving false information to whoever it should receive. And then I would say the final one will be around, if it's around governance, I would say educate as well your team on the new threats and the new areas. I wouldn't talk so much about teams here, but I think cyber is in a speed light as well, in connection with the trends around the AI and the supply chain and the identity over the perimeter. And I think the teams needs to be up to speed, and we need to nurture them, to instigate them to continue to learn, so that they can serve us better and they could do great things in our organization.
Yep, absolutely. So 3 things from Pedro. It's basically about supply chain, it's about use of AI, and it's about education in the organization. Michael, how does this answer the top 3 priorities look like from your point of view, perhaps from a technology innovation?
Okay, I'll try. First one for me would be definitely pick and look for the tools that will keep pace with the fast-changing cybersecurity landscape, right? I'm always surprised, and we always think it's going to slow down. It's going to slow down, and every year there's 1,000 new things to think about. So really look for those vendors that can support in that, and they have a really strong product and engineering focus, because ultimately that's going to be your long-term partner. Second one, actually, I'm going to tie back to the discovery piece. Make sure, especially with everything moving to the everywhere internet world, you have a really good visibility across your much broader landscape than what it would have been, maybe a couple of years ago, so that you can prioritize, right? It's very hard to do that if you've got massive blind spots that you're not aware of. In fact, I would say look for your blind spots. The last one may not be a pure product and innovation one, but I'll mention it nonetheless, because I'm still surprised sometimes. Make sure you have run books for disaster scenarios. It still happens. And we're on the vendor side, so we see this happening all the time. Some big incident in a big company, data exfiltration, something goes down, and there's no plan in place to what to do if the bad thing happens, right? Because it can happen to anyone.
Super interesting. Michael, to sum it up, you are talking about having the right tooling and the right vendors. We're talking about having the observability in place and the plan ready for if things ever go down. Pedro, Michael, thank you so much. I learned so much, and I think our listeners as well. Appreciate you taking the time, sharing the insights, and giving really actionable advice.
Thank you for having us, Mark.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to the Connectivity Cloud podcast. If you found today's episode valuable, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss future updates. Stay ahead of the curve, stay connected, and stay secure, as always, with Cloudflare. Thank you for tuning in to the Connectivity Cloud podcast. If you found today's episode valuable, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss future updates. Stay ahead of the curve, stay connected, and stay secure, as always, with Cloudflare.